welcome folks. We're a couple of minutes early, but you've all gone quiet, so I thought I'd better make a start. My name is Tim Stratford, and I have the privilege of being the Dean at this cathedral, and we're trying to promote a sort of spirit of public debate and good disagreement and vibrant conversation in the city of Chester, which has not been a hotbed of debate very often, but we're trying to change that. And so we have these public discussions a number of times through the year, which we call Assemble. Welcome today to Who Owns the Moon? Now, that is a catchy title, but it's not just a question of sci-fi, it's becoming a real question for today. And you don't have to look hard at millennia of human behaviour to see how ready people are to compete with one another, even to fight one another and to war with one another for territory. Now, whether the moon is territory is a question. Territory literally relates to the Earth, but it's within our reach, and what else one day will be within our reach. I will leave our more learned panel members to take us further into those questions, and thank you very much for coming, and to Joe Henwood, who will introduce the panel shortly, for chairing us. This is part of a series of public debates. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about what else is planned in the programme this year. We have what Emily, who organises these evenings, has described to me as a bonus assemble on the 15th of May. Is that a bonus assemble that's quite close to this one? Because it wasn't in the original plan. No justice, no peace. And that is going to take place under an art installation which will be in the South Transept called Peace Doves. And that will be, that's the 15th of May. Where's Anthony? I saw him in here before. Has he gone to get some peace doves? There may be, we're inviting people of Chester to write a message of peace on these paper doves that will be hanging in the South Transept. So if you see some paper doves at the back, at the end, please do write a message of peace on one and leave it on the table for Anthony to pick up. And then on the 19th of June, we have conversations with refugees. So those two are the two that we have planned up until the middle of the year. 15th of May, no justice, no peace. And 19th of June, conversations with refugees. We keep Assemble dates posted on our website. So if you need your memory jogging, please do visit our website. That's all you need from me. I will remind you at the end that there is a big QR code near the door on the way out. And if you point your mobile phone at it, it will give you the opportunity to leave us some feedback. The feedback really helps us organise these events better, plan how to manage the conversation, and plan the programme as well. I will remind you of that at the end. But now, Joe, I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Oh, just getting caught in the microphone lead. Welcome everyone to Cafe 1092 at the Chester Cathedral refectory. I'm Jo Henwood and I'm a freelance journalist, editor and PR. My job here tonight is to introduce our Assemble panel, who know a lot more about space than I do, and to encourage you all to ask questions or maybe just share anything you feel may be of benefit to the panel when I ask them the question, who owns the moon? According to international law, no one nation can own the moon. So we could finish our conversation now and go and have another cup of tea.
Good idea.
and that would be it. But the UN treaty, which is fabulously named the Outer Space Treaty, was agreed in 1967, almost 60 years ago, and 2 years before Neil Armstrong made that inimitable step for mankind. So there have been other treaties, there have been other agreements set up between now and then, but they've mostly not been signed by all the nations that need to sign it, and so they've all been deemed not to be fulfilled. So we know from recent experience on Earth that treaties and agreements can turn on a sixpence. So I'm looking forward to an entertaining discussion tonight about who owns the moon. So now we'll turn to our panel. Between them, they've got a wealth of experience in space warfare, astropolitics, space communications, and lunar missions. I'll go first to, I'll start on my left here. We've got Dr. Bleddyn Bowen, who's Associate Professor of Astropolitics at Durham University and an expert in space warfare. Recognised by the author and journalist Tim Marshall, the man who writes the Prisoner of Geography series, if any of you have ever read them. Tim Marshall describes Bleddyn as Britain's leading thinker on astropolitics. He's also advised, presented and briefed for governments and agencies across the world and at home. Ian Jones is a satellite communications engineer and an entrepreneur who was awarded an OBE last year for his services to space communications. Back in 2008, Ian acquired the site Goonhilly Earth Station in Cornwall, the site from which the moon landings and Live Aid were broadcast to the nation, in case you didn't know where they all came from. But since then, his team have assisted 10 lunar missions and supported 5 different moon landings. Carla Mitchell, who was until recently known as Carla Sharp, so for those of you who are experts in space, is a space development strategist who's been with the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory for over a decade. She founded Africa to Moon, that's number 2, if any of you are going to Google it afterwards, a crowdfunding initiative with the goal of inspiring African youth in STEM subjects by launching Africa's first lunar mission. Carla is also a member of the International Institute for Space Law. So I'm going to hand over to you each to tell us a little bit more about your area of expertise, but also where you stand on who owns the moon. But before we do, I'm just inspired by our venue for tonight, Cafe 1092. I'm wondering what people in the 11th century would have known about the moon or what effect it had on their lives. I gather that it would have been very symbolic and had a religious influence on people, and that they would have understood the phases of the moon simply by looking up, but also it would have affected agriculture and the way they grew their crops. Maybe some of the educated would have known about the effect that the moon had on the tides, but they would have had no concept of what the moon looked like, or what was on the moon, or any resources that we may have access to now. So I wondered, Bleddyn, if you could introduce yourself, but also talk a little bit about what we know about the moon now.
Sure. I hope everyone can hear me. Yes? Good. Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much, Joe, and thank you for the Cathedral tonight for organising the event and for inviting me here tonight, and thank you all for coming. So yeah, my background is in international relations and war studies, so I'm not a scientist. I'll defer all technical scientific questions to my left. But the politics of outer space is where my expertise is, and when people think of outer space, they think, what is political about outer space? Absolutely everything. Everything that humanity does is about politics, or is a result of politics, or impacts politics in some way. The reason we've had a space age in the first place is because the technologies needed to put anything in space was fundamental to the development of nuclear weapons for the two superpowers of the Cold War and a number of other countries in the Cold War as well. If you can launch nuclear weapons out into outer space to hit another point on the planet, you can put a satellite into orbit as well. And those fundamental technologies opened up outer space for the less harmful scientific activities in space and the beneficial things that we all use for space today, including sat-nav and weather satellites, which also have their own military purposes. So we are using collectively outer space for military, economic and political purposes, as we do the sea and the air to help us do whatever it is that we do on land, for better or worse. So in terms of the moon and where I stand on the moon, just to get us started and to stay within my 5 minutes of allotted time to kick us off. Oh, it's difficult.
I can kick you. You're
difficult for an academic, yes. Got plenty of books on this nonsense. But in terms of the moon, right now, there is nothing of military or economic significance occurring on the moon, and I doubt I will live to see that change. The important things that are going on, or that can happen on the moon in the near term, are in terms of the science and exploration, and in terms of the political symbolism of it. So there's so much we don't know about the moon still. Our, well, geology, or geology doesn't make much sense because geo means earth, but knowing what moon is actually made of and what's beneath the surface, we just don't know enough. And the symbolism, I'm sure everyone else here was watching the live lunar landing of an Indian robot last summer. No? Oh, just me then. I was watching it on YouTube. I was. One half of the screen, well, it's the right panel, clearly. But one half of the screen was on the YouTube live stream from the Indian Space Research Organization, which goes back to 1969. One half of it was a CGI, a computer image of the lunar lander, of the robot, where it was at that time. The other half of the screen was Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister. And it was sort of like Gogglebox Indian Prime Minister edition. So we were watching Narendra Modi watch the same thing as we were in real time. And after it landed, he had the Indian mini flags out and made a very long political speech about Indian technological greatness, etc. So techno-nationalism, promoting nationalism and national ideology through technology is the symbolic element of the moon. So I'll just give you that as food for thought and yield the floor. Thank you.
I'm doing the whole thing for $75 million as well.
Yeah, cheaper than the film Interstellar.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Bleddyn. I don't know if we're all now going to write that down for the next Gogglebox version of any lunar landing. Over to Ian. Would you like to set out your stall for who owns the moon?
Yes, indeed. So, again, thank you, all of you, for coming. It's rather scary and embarrassing. I know about 3/4 of you in the audience, but there we go. Thank you for coming out and listening to us drone on about the moon. Yeah, so I'm from Wrexham originally, and I studied electronics in Leeds. I've spent my entire career in the satellite communications business, originally designing satellite radios. And then, as Joe said, this bizarre thing happened to me where I suddenly found myself rebuilding Goonhilly. So that's been a really enlightening experience. We converted what was a telecommunications center into the world's first and only private deep space communications antenna. So now we work with NASA, the European Space Agency, and a number of private missions. And so we've communicated with missions as far away as Jupiter, on the surface of Mars, orbiting Mars, and as Joe says, several missions that have orbited the moon or landed on the moon, including Chandrayaan-3, the Indian mission, which landed actually while the Earth was facing India, but 3 minutes after it landed on the surface of the moon, the Earth had turned a little bit. It was on Goonhilly's horizon, so the first images from the surface of the moon from Chandrayaan-3 came back through Goonhilly. Who owns the moon? Just wanted to think about the perspective of the moon. You know, we think of the moon. A lot of people think that the moon comes up during the night time. Actually, it can be, you know, during the day or the night. We see the phases of the moon, but it comes and goes, and it has phases. If you were on the moon itself, because the moon is tide locked to the Earth, its year and its month and its day are all 28 days long. So we always see the same face of the moon facing towards the Earth. So if you were on the moon looking at the Earth, you would experience day and night. It would get to 150 degrees during the day and minus 150 degrees at night time, but the Earth would always be up there in the sky. So it's a platform from which you can see the Earth. But that means if you're on the far side of the moon, you never see the Earth. It's always pointing outwards away from the Earth. And it's interesting that there have been missions to the far side of the moon recently by China. And so the question is, who owns the moon? But who owns the far side of the moon? Just as much as, you know, the moon has very interesting geography, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But anyway, it's a fascinating subject from the point of view of running a commercial organization and seeing, you know, how the moon, how governments would like the commercialization of space to extend to lunar exploration as well.
Thank you, Ian. And Carla, I know Carla's been on a plane from South Africa, so
If I'm incoherent, forgive me.
I'm sure she won't be. Over to you.
So my background, my real focus is space policy and space economics, particularly for developing nations. You know, in Africa, space in one way or another contributes to the solutions of all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. We don't realize it, I think, even in advanced countries like this, that you're using space technology or the spin-offs from space technology all day long. It's a part of our everyday lives. We often question the need for space or spending so much on these space missions, particularly to the moon. But it really is integrated into our lives and really is a source of solutions and addressing the challenges we have in Africa. So you mentioned Africa to Moon. This is going to be the first radio astronomy array on the moon. So I work with the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory on the square kilometer array. So Britain is a partner in this project. We're building the world's largest radio telescope. And so it's a wonderful international endeavor. And we're putting a version of that on the moon. And what's interesting about the project is we've come this far and we haven't spent a cent. I've bought a few pizzas for the engineers. But it's really a testimony to collaboration. And I think at the heart of space is always collaboration. We're all space nuts in our hearts, and we want to see each other succeed. We do get a little caught up in the politics. You mentioned India. Actually, they're a wonderful example of a spacefaring nation that has spent a fortune on space and made great strides, but they've made sure to feed that back to a grassroots level. And the people on the ground really feel the benefit. In terms of the moon, so I speak a lot on our solar system. It's a very intricately woven system to maintain life on Earth, and the moon plays a big part in that. And I would risk saying that the moon is owned by he who created it. I find it humorous that people stumble across stuff and then fight each other for ownership of something that really wasn't ours to begin with. In the history of humanity, we have never created or advanced without destruction. And it's something that I would really strive to do within our projects, and I hope for the future of humanity that we are able to find a way forward where we can advance without destruction, but collaboratively. And then I think we will make strides towards the Star Trek we all dream of. But I think as humanity, we have to make a change. And I hope that the moon, if we share the moon and the programs that run on from that, the moon is really the stepping stone to bigger projects like getting to Mars. And if we can do it together, I think we will get far further than if we fight each other as we have in the past.
Thank you. Thanks, all of you. I just wanted to pick up on what you've all really touched on, is the things that we can't do without in everyday life that is affected by space. So, I mean, we all, we probably all use a sat-nav or our Google Maps, or just, probably all of you who have never been to Chester before have used them to, to find your hotel or find the cathedral. Do you think that people know how much of space affects their day, or do you think that maybe more could be done to communicate that sort of information?
I think the awareness has improved in recent years. So when I started my PhD on space warfare at Aberystwyth University's Department of International Politics back in 2012.
Yeah, which isn't that long ago.
No, it was just a few years ago. It would be very difficult to have a basic level of understanding, even amongst academics in politics and international relations, as to why outer space, in particular Earth orbit, was important for international relations and the functioning of state and society and the global economy, because satellites provide all the services and data gathering services and transmission that we rely on, where cables aren't good enough or you need a higher vantage point. So, for example, if you have Sky TV, or your neighbors do, you'll see that their dishes point to the same point in the sky. They're looking at a specific satellite in geostationary orbit, which is about 36,000 kilometers away. And many people I know, I spoke to over the years, didn't really make that connection that their own house is in the space age. It's communicating or receiving communications from a satellite. So even just TV, but in places like India, they pioneered satellite television back in the 1970s with NASA, and they rolled out the first tele-education and telemedicine programs. They were doing remote working in education before we all had to do it in COVID. And they did it decades earlier, because it was far easier for India in the 1970s to put satellite dishes in the village telecentres hooked up to a diesel generator, rather than building huge radio masts all across the subcontinent, where there was very little ground infrastructure for the big lorries that would have to carry the heavy equipment and various ground cables. So that's how dependent and useful satellite communications can be. But the awareness is certainly better now. So 10 years ago, the UK brought out its first national space policy and national space security policy. So in Whitehall, they're no longer laughing at me when I tell them, yes, I work on space policy and British space policy and space security. They may laugh at me for other reasons, but they don't laugh at me about my subject anymore. So that mentality has shifted, because now there is a greater understanding. But even amongst professionals who ought to know better, it's still a journey sometimes to get that communication across. And one of my favorite lines, last point, from the United States years ago now, was when they were going through the budgets for a new weather satellite for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the US. And a senator was asking this person at NOAA, why do we need another weather satellite? We've already got the Weather Channel. And that was a US senator, and that was about 20 years ago. So, yes, anyway.
There we go. Very good. And just to add to that, I'm sure you've all got one of these in your pocket. 16 satellite receivers in one of those. And, that satellite signal is in here right now. If you have a look at your map, your Google Maps, your little blue dot will be identifying that you're in here. So the satellite signals are actually getting to where we are right now. You know, we've all heard the horrible news over the last few weeks about the war fighting in Ukraine and the Earth observation images, which are either being used to help Ukraine or Russia to fight the war. That you know, those satellites are flying over us, looking down. You could say that that's you know, a very bad thing in terms of essentially being spied on, but I guess it depends on whose side you're on. And you know, that's the reality. There are so many things that, you know, the spacecraft, the satellites are used for. On the other side, some of the science work that is done in space has led to developments in medicine like MRI scanners. And, you know, so this has all come about because of the space and satellite technology.
And so, Carla, you mentioned, you've all been talking about communications technology, but we all know that international politicians are not that great at communicating. They just are very good at saying what they want, and then somebody else says what they want. But communication, I mean, you speak about the space community and how they all get on and they're working so well together. How do you think, and I was recently reading about 2 astronauts, one was Russian, one was American. We don't hear about those sorts of things. We certainly don't hear about Russia and America chatting cordially at the moment. So how do you think you in the space community can assist with international politics?
What do you think? Can I give just a very quick anecdote? A long time ago, I visited Goonhilly way before I had any personal interest in it. I was doing some work down there, and there was a room about this big. It was the UK's international telephone exchange, and it had all of the equipment to communicate with different countries in the world. And as you sort of do when you're in the electronics industry, you sometimes get briefings from people in strange hairdressing saloons telling you who you can and can't speak to. The thing that surprised me going into this room was all of the racks of equipment were labelled with the countries. And so there was the USA, and there was France and Germany, and there was the USSR, and China, and North Korea, and all the places that we weren't friendly with, we still had telephone communications with them. And I think that's the thing about the space industry. It enables us to communicate with each other. And you know, we hear a lot on the news about world leaders phoning each other up and having conversations, and it's important to be able to communicate. So that's what we do.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been to a satellite manufacturing company and been onto the floor where their satellites are, and they're separated by curtains, and there was one being built for China, Russia. You know, they're all built by the same people, designed by the same scientists. I think, you know, science is really, I think, the platform for the collaboration, because it's science that drives the innovation, the commercialization, and the science is where people collaborate. Space is unfortunately a dominance, as you pointed out, a dominance industry. So, and it's some of the technologies relate, as you say, to nuclear, the area of nuclear sciences. And so there's national security and this political dominance. But I think the scientists really do work together, and the engineers, they do want to collaborate. And, you know, back to the moon, who owns the moon? You know, people always comment, well, it's America or China, whoever puts their flag there. And to be honest, we don't have a space police. There's nobody up there with little laser guns.
Yeah.
You know,
Thank you, Carla. Bleddyn, you've got something to add?
Yeah, just in terms of what we mean by space community, because there are many different space communities, because the space science community is a different world to space intelligence communities, the spooks that work in GCHQ or in the Central Intelligence Agency or the National Reconnaissance Office in the United States. In the intelligence, security, and military communities that operate space systems or satellites, the spy satellites, communication satellites, they often don't communicate with anyone else. So in terms of the science and a lot of industry and diplomacy, yes, there's a lot of exchange of information and there's a lot that goes on in all sectors. But in the military and national security and intelligence sides, of which they still have the lion's share of spending in space around the world, it's all very closed doors, very opaque. And like, as a scholar, like, I can't find anything particularly interesting that happened after the 1970s in the archives still. It's all still very classified, even with things that are 40 plus years old. So maybe for the right reasons, but you know, for me, I can't access them, which is unfortunate. Yeah.
So you mentioned money there, obviously space investigation of any description will cost money. So will ownership of the moon eventually come down to the person or the people who've got the biggest wallet? Carla?
Yeah, I mean, I think the domination of the moon is who can get there. You know, it's very expensive. I mean, we've applied to go as a piggyback payload. So if our telescope does get to the moon, we don't have to pay for that, but that would have a price tag of between $20 and $50 million. So I think it's currently to get to the moon is about $2 million a kilogram, I think, something like that. So essentially who gets to the moon, who gets to use the moon is who can afford it, who has the resourcing. It's not a question of ownership, but like I said, if you're there and no one else is, it's not ownership, but you have free reign.
Yeah, and the physical presence of matters, because at the moment, because there's no pressing economic rationale for seizing things on the moon, because it's like Antarctica at this point, or perhaps the deep sea bed, or it's really far away. And I think it's worth stressing that it still costs, depending which provider you go for your rocket services, between $2,000 to $20,000 per kilogram to put a satellite in space. It costs much more to put a person on the International Space Station, and it costs much, much more if you want to bring kilograms back from the space station intact as well, back to Earth. So the highest, most useful satellites fly usually no more than 40,000 kilometers altitude. The moon is 10 times further away again than the most useful satellites for military, economic, and political purposes. So the scale of effort needed to get to the moon in any significant way is huge, which is why when you see these science missions to the moon, they're really small. They're really hyper-efficient, hyper-miniaturized. I think that one of the Japanese missions was a great example of that. So yeah, $2 million per kilogram to the moon. But whoever can put things on the moon will have a very big influence in any international governance mechanism that might emerge over the moon in the future. Just like Antarctica. The Antarctic Treaty is coming up for renegotiation and renewal in the next 20 years or something. I think it's 2059, actually. Now, different countries have territorial claims on Antarctica, including Britain, but it's not recognized by China or America. Now, who are the biggest countries in Antarctica? America and China. They have the most people and the most bases. They're followed by the Europeans and Russia and the Japanese. So I don't know which way that's going to go, but again, Antarctica is about science, not about resources. Although maybe a certain president might want to think it's about resources at some point, who knows? But the moon will be about who's there doing what. And it doesn't have to be the richest country, because India is not the richest country, but it is one of the most capable in terms of lunar exploration, and they are going to have their own astronaut program soon. They will have their own space station within the next 10 years as well. So India's the one to watch, I think. Yeah.
And Carla, I wonder how important is it to you, and I know it is very important, that Africa gets to the moon?
Well, I think it's important for Africa because we seem to always be on the back foot through each of the industrial revolutions and through the technology growth. And it would be, I think it's good for Africa, aside from emotionally and mentally, but just good for us to feel and be a part of the cutting edge because we do have the capability. And just on the moon, you know, currently it is far and it is expensive, but the moon does have resources and very useful resources for us on Earth, whether it be helium-3 is one of them, a form of clean energy, we hope. And the moon is really strategic, as I mentioned earlier, to moving on to further exploration of space. And so I think dominance on the moon is going to become important, particularly over the next 15 to 20 years. A lot of bases are being planned. I know the Chinese, the US and Europe, and probably India. Again, the crying shame that we could be there sooner if we all did it together as opposed to the duplication of expenditure. But I think who has dominance on the moon is going to become very important, maybe beyond our lifetimes of caring about it. But I think in the next 20 to 30 years, you're going to see it becoming very important.
Ian?
Yeah, I think I would sort of rephrase the question, who owns the moon, to who cares who owns the moon? And, you know, does it matter? And coming back to the whole space politics and economics, and, you know, what does it cost to get there? To some degree, if you let the superpowers spend, you know, large amounts of government money, then it can cost billions. One of the things that NASA is doing is it's starting to look at commercializing, commercializing in inverted commas, because what they're actually doing is they're saying to companies, you go to the moon, you fund it yourselves, and we'll pay for a piggyback ride, so you can take a rover lander for us. The reality is that, and this is the sort of the cleverness of the American economy, if you like, that you know, the world's greatest capitalist economy, is that NASA then will pay for the entire cost of the mission and some, so that this private company that's doing this commercially can get to the moon. But what you're seeing right now is there are a number of missions on the way to the moon or have just landed on the moon. So that's all happening, and there's a bit of a new race happening. That the moon is the latest place to go, and perhaps why we're having this discussion. There's so many in the news. You hear another mission has landed. The Firefly mission last landed 3 weeks ago. Intuitive Machines fell over on the moon for the second time in a year. The iSpace has a mission which is on its way to the moon right now, a Japanese mission. So there are more and more missions going to the moon right now, and it is a bit of a it's a combination of things, I think, in terms of it's for many nations it's a matter of inspiring sort of next generation and getting their capability to match those of other nations. I think for China and America, it's a bit of a battle of technology. And then you come to the UK, and as always, the UK is a bit of a strange place because I think we believe the hype that we hear. In the UK, our politicians believe that the moon has become a commercial place, and it really isn't. And and so there's a tiny amount of of funding available in the UK. So don't worry that we're spending all of your taxes going to the moon. In the UK, we're really not. But what that does is it makes us more inventive. And I think, like the Indians, you try and do it at the lowest cost possible.
Thank you. Well, we've had a lot of food for thought so far. Emily would like to try a little experiment this evening, which is slightly different from before, in that we'll take a very short break if anybody wants to go and just get another drink or use the facilities, but straight back. And then we'd like to open up some questions to the audience, if any of you've got any questions you'd like to put to the panel. I've got some more questions here, should you be too shy, but I would really, really like to hear from you. So we'll just take, I'm going to say 2 to 3 minutes break, and just in time for you to talk to each other, come up with a really good question, and then we'll start again. So we've not done that before.
Oh, see how it goes.
Just see if
Very good.
are inspired to.
Sound like a movie.
Sounds great.
Hey,
Sounds great.
are you sure?
I could go and say hello to someone.
No, not at all.
Thanks.
Are these off now? Are they still on?
I think you're coming through very clearly.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you need another drink? Anyone need another drink? No.
Good. Oh, well, I don't know about the audience, but I think that went very quickly.
Yes, it did. Yeah. Maybe they'll say how much longer. So I think we might go on to AI, because I think AI is very much in the news, and what AI might be able to do for, if people don't ask, if we don't get any questions from, I think we've actually dealt with some of the questions that have come here. So,
I think there at the end as well, something we haven't mentioned is, things like asteroid mining and robotics. What a lot of these missions are doing at the moment are testing robots in space, so that people don't have to go.
Yeah.
A lot of these new
Robot
missions,
versus humans.
yeah, so that we can, and then AI feeds into that as well. But I think that's
okay. Well, maybe I can come to you if at the beginning.
if that works into.
Yeah.
Are we back on now or not?
I think they've never gone off.
Yeah.
Every mic is a mic.
When's Ian going to bring his Lego rocket, do you think?
Yeah. I've got the Lego space station, but not the Lego Saturn V.
Are you bringing that with you?
Show and tell.
Just this way. There we go. Did you make it?
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
The Danes.
Okay, everyone, are we ready to start again? Has a cup of tea or coffee fueled the brain cells for a question? Does anyone out in the audience have any questions? We have had some submitted in advance, but I would like to hear from any of you, or just an observation. This lady thinks we should have had a raffle for the Lego rocket, which Ian has proudly brought to centre stage. The gentleman there.
Thank you. I really want to press a little bit on the pace of change, really. The first time I remember being told this won't change in my lifetime was when soon after they discovered the double helix and said in our biology O-level class that there's no chance of unravelling this in our lifetime. And so I think quite a few points that have been made just make me think that the pace of change seems so fast to me. So how are you so sure that things won't change even faster?
Ian.
Yeah, so, gosh, things are changing incredibly quickly, and particularly if you look at AI, the pace that is changing is astonishing. So we used to have this thing called Moore's law. I don't know if you've heard of Moore's law. Basically, that the amount of processing speed of a computer would double every 2 years, and that has been true since about the 1960s when microprocessors and microchips were developed for the Apollo space program until 2018. And the predictions were that this was going to plateau because the size of a transistor was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The reality is that from 2018 until now, it's gone basically 10 times a year, so 100 times every 2 years. So it's gone from twice, it's got 50 times faster. And this is because, not because the technology, the ability to build a transistor smaller has happened, but it's the fact that we are now doing parallel processing and in graphics chips. And that's enabled us to completely shatter Moore's law. So we're now millions of times faster than we were in terms of computing, and that's what's enabled you to do your ChatGPT. Now, that's one thing, that's AI. The question of getting into space and getting away from the Earth, we have this big problem of the Earth, and that's gravity. It's holding us all down here. And you can't do that gently. You just have to go for it with a stonking great rocket. So that's going to...
Here's one prepared earlier.
Indeed. So getting away from planet Earth is it's still the same technology. If you look at the rockets today and the Saturn V here, they're roughly the same size, roughly the same power, roughly doing the same job. Most of this, by the way, just to show you, this is all fuel from here to here, and the people go just in that little tiny bit there.
I didn't know that. Carla, you mentioned earlier when we were chatting about robots going to space, so that we're not looking at sending humans, but that maybe there's more development. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, for a person to go to space, I think you have to take 30 kilograms of air, food, etc., water for each day they're going to spend in space, whereas a robot doesn't need any of that. It's obviously not a risk to life. And so, you know, with serious commercial views on mining asteroids, for example, you know, an asteroid can have more precious metals on it than all our mines on Earth. And so there is this view that to use robots to do that. And a lot of these lunar missions now are utilizing robots, testing robots. And of course, we are not there to control them. And so more and more compute and AI is going to play a role in this. And so I think that is another step forward that we're not looking at, I suppose, as seriously, but is going to become very prominent in the future.
Bleddyn.
Just very quickly, so I can, as well as talk about space, we can talk about the philosophy of time as well, and the idea of progress and technology. And that's a very subjective thing, whether we think technology is advancing quickly or slowly. And a point, I think, in terms of my confidence in that, why I'm probably not going to live to see, you know, moon bases and all that, for good or bad, is when that physical challenge is so difficult, the brute material resources needed aren't going to change, but also because the engineers today, to try and really bring down that cost per kilogram, even just to Earth orbit or especially to the moon, they are still failing to crack the problems that engineers failed to crack back in the 1960s and the 1980s. My favorite example is the Starship rocket with Elon Musk and his SpaceX company. I've not seen anything that tells me they're going to be able to do anything that the space shuttle with the Americans didn't already do and failed to do as well. So I believe that Starship, the big rocket that SpaceX is building, will eventually work. They can get it to work. Where it will fall down is in the economics of it, the affordable reusability of it. So unless they can actually make that economically viable, it'll just be into the same, it'll go into the same hole as the space shuttle. We're technically very impressive, but economically it was a disaster.
So I'm just saying, Carla, you mentioned that a robot maybe could go and then mine rare minerals, and we've all agreed nobody owns the moon, but when those rare minerals are brought back to Earth, and whoever they're brought back by, who owns them when they're back here?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it'll make for a very interesting bun fight. I suppose whoever went and got them would justify it with their effort and expenditure, but the use of outer space is supposed to be for the benefit of all, but I think you better...
But yeah, so that's the language in the Outer Space Treaty, that space should be used for peaceful purposes, for the benefit of all, but in reality, almost every country has interpreted that in the Outer Space Treaty to mean, well, we can use military satellites because they're not directly killing anyone, but the weapons they're linked into are. But the weapons are on Earth, so that's fine. That's the practical interpretation. And the reality is, and this is the point I make in my book, Original Sin, which I will plug, Original Sin, How Technology and War in Outer Space, but is that space technologies were developed to enhance the killing power of the state. And that's the original sin of space technology, fairly apt to use that terminology, I guess. So, and that doesn't mean that we can't use space for good, or we can't enjoy the things we like about space, or we can't enjoy those images from Hubble or the James Webb Space Telescope. But that dark side, that dark political side of space is there. And in terms of ownership then, yes, the language is there in Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty that no state can claim territory, but on resources, it doesn't say anything. And the United States and Luxembourg have already passed laws domestically that says if a company registered in those countries go to the moon, grab samples, they are allowed to sell them in their domestic markets, or those governments can buy it off them. So this is the creeping bit where, you know, territory versus resources. And the other problem as well, if China and America do put a lot more things on the moon or have a base of some kind, you might need safety zones around those bases. So that, right, we are putting this base here, we're not claiming the territory, but we have a base here. We want your traffic to stay away from, 5 kilometers radius of this base, for example. Well, isn't that claiming territory or volumes by stealth? I don't know.
However, one of the issues is that the place that people are landing at the moon right now isn't in the Sea of Tranquility, it's on the south pole of the moon. And the reason we're interested in going to the south pole is because the peculiarity of the way that the moon orbits, at the south pole you have places where it's always sunny. So the moon has 14 days of daylight and 14 days of nighttime normally, but at just this very specific point on the South Pole, it's sunny 100% of the time, unless you go into one or two specific craters where it's dark 100% of the time. And so that's where there's ice, there's water ice in these craters. So you can land a spaceship in the sunny part, right next to the rim of the crater, and then you can take your robot down, mine the ice, bring it back into the sunshine. You put a solar panel on, you can electrolyze the water and turn it into oxygen to breathe and hydrogen for your rocket motors. And you can even use the water to drink and to put into the lunar soil to grow some plants. So it's a really interesting place to go. So whereas the moon is really big, everybody might just want to go to that one crater. And,
so a new frontier for Severn Trent water.
There we go.
There we go.
Very interesting. We've just touched on water, which we know on Earth is a rare resource at the moment. So has that triggered anyone in there who'd like to ask a question over there? Can everyone hear the questions? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was just thinking what resource could possibly be on the moon that could justify the expense of bringing it back, because ultimately isn't that going to determine who cares about ownership?
Yeah, so I had a great debate in Washington, D.C. last year on this, and I was on the side of the debate saying there's nothing of value on the moon beyond the science right now. So on the helium-3 point, I mean, yes, but we don't know how to build those fusion reactors yet. And they're always 30 years away. I remember being a child watching BBC News saying, oh yes, we've just discovered cold fusion, we know how to do it. Turned out no. And the fusion tech is always 30 years away for as long as I've been alive and longer. So, so it's about the viability of those resources, and I'm not convinced it's there. But our geological knowledge of the moon is still so sketchy because we only know what's close to the surface of the moon. So the Americans on the final mission of Apollo only sent the first actual trained scientist up. So, and a geologist as well. And he just started digging with a trowel and found orange, like regolith or dirt, and completely befuddled by it. So there's a lot more to find out about the moon, but until the science is done and the exploration is done, it's like, it's all potentials and maybes much further down the line, nothing imminent. So good for the politicians and lawyers to argue about something that's very little consequence right now. But if the economic demand gets there, we'd better have ideas on how to do it without making things worse.
Carla?
Yeah, I think in the wider scale as well, you know, radio astronomy drove the development of Wi-Fi, and the whole world relies on Wi-Fi. He mentioned the medical imaging, etc. It's the striving that solves problems on Earth, that gives us new technologies, and we don't know what we'll find until we find it when it comes to space, but it's trying to solve the problems of getting there and making these new discoveries that change what and how we do things on Earth. So I think if we had to stop striving just because we didn't see imminent economic benefits, I think that would be damaging to our progress as well.
Ian, is it worth
Well, it's
financially?
interesting, was it the chief exec of IBM that said that we might need 3 computers? And then Arthur C. Clarke, he came up with the idea of the geostationary orbit, and he worked out that we just need 3 satellites, and we'd be able to communicate with, that's all we would need. And what do we have now? It's like 10,000 satellites orbiting around the Earth.
Making a big mess.
Yeah. So
Does that mean we need them all?
what does it mean? Do we need to watch cat and dog videos on our phones? That's this is an important question.
It's a form of therapy.
So the amount of communications bandwidth that we are consuming is exponential because it becomes available, and then we get hooked on it, and then we're addicted to it all. So I think it's an inevitability that if one person can go to space, another person wants to go to space, and if one country is going there, other countries want to go there. And who are we to say that it's, you know, only these people should go?
Yes. Yeah.
So it becomes it's part of our human nature, isn't it, that we are greedy and we just want to do something that everybody else can do.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I mean, I'm all for collaboration, but competition does inspire development and innovation as well. It's just finding that healthy balance, I think.
Right. We had a question over here. Oh. We've got two over here, so we'll try and get you both.
Thank you for the interesting talk so far. Just on that last point there about the exploration and driving innovation, I think one of the questions that I wanted to ask was, regardless of the ultimate answer to the question, who owns the moon, what does the panel think about perhaps it's that question is being asked, that we're driving innovation, we're driving scientific research, is that the more important thing, that we keep this drive to be striving for something rather than solving the ultimate question of who owns it?
So, did everybody hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll start, if I can start us off. So I think, you know, in Africa, we tend to be a little like, they've got a satellite, so we must have a satellite. You know, my rocket's bigger than yours, and we all need what each other has. And technology is no use if you're chasing it for technology's sake. Technology is purely a tool to solve problems. By working together and striving for those things that are just out of reach forces us to innovate, which takes us forward. So I think you're right, it is more important to keep striving than just to have ownership.
Yeah, so I'll put my academic and also research supervisor hat on. In that, I think that it's a yes and a no answer, which is, again, classically academic. But, I mean, yes, in that in all walks of academia, there's a place for basic research. Big questions, you don't really know where it's going to go, or you're not quite clear on the specific problem or applications, but it's worth always having some kind of funding and opportunities for that. One, because some people are just better at that research, and you never know where they're going to go with it. And some of the biggest breakthroughs have come from the freest, biggest thinkers that are not immediately obvious until 40 years later. So, you know, Einstein did the theory of relativity. It was only 40 years later, everybody knew the significance of that, you know, the atomic bomb. But then there's also the applied question, and, you know, in terms of a taxpayer as well, you know, I'm very hawkish on, right, who's getting what money to do what in space right now? And so there's a balance to be had of which specific problem or what question are you trying to answer? So I'm not opposed to robotic science on the moon because there's so much we don't know. So I'm like, yeah, go and find out this specific thing. So it's always a balance, but all technological changes do present political and social consequences as well. So you may have heard about space-based solar power being talked about, where it's about putting huge solar farms in deep space that then wirelessly beam electricity back to the Earth. And some of those might be put in a geostationary belt. Well, if Europe wants to do a lot of that, they have to put them directly above Africa. Do African states get a share of that electricity or not? Because if that becomes a feasible thing, European countries or the EU will be able to do it long before African states might be able to gather the resources and the political will to do it. But by the time they do so, there'll be no more room left for the African states to put their solar farms up. So yeah, it's a lot of moving parts at the same time, and you need a bit of everything to make things work.
Ian, are you an end result or the process and the innovation?
Yeah, it's. I think it's, as Bleddyn says, it's a sort of a yes and a no in a sense. There's been a huge amount of progress because of the space industry, and you could say that of many other endeavours as well. But I think the space industry, because it's so difficult, is it sort of stands out. I think any economic study that's been done of space shows that there's a direct return on investment of tenfold at least, just in terms of the direct return on investment. And then if you take the fact that, you know, we have computers and modern medicine, it's completely transformed the entire planet. And those are some of the hidden benefits that come out of the sector as well.
Thank you. I hope that answered some of your questions. And we've got one other question in the front here.
Yeah, mine was a little bit more prosaic. If nobody owns them, who cleans it? And who cleans up all the space in between when you're all chucking up your satellites and littering a few square kilometres around the South Pole?
This is another interesting question. So first of all, how long have we got? So the moon itself is bombarded, and you can look up the moon and you can see the craters. Okay, so you know that's largely from the formation of the solar system. But every single day, we talk about the weather that we have here in the atmosphere. But in the solar system, the sun creates a different type of weather, and these are the charged particles that come zooming off the sun. And in particular, every 11 years when the sun has a solar maxima, these what are called CMEs, coronal mass ejections, where a magnetic field breaks and fires off high velocity particles into space. And that makes it difficult for humans to go into space because they can kill us. And the Earth protects us by the magnetic field. So as soon as we leave Earth's magnetic field and go beyond low Earth orbit, then we're in danger. Going to the moon is an inherently dangerous thing to do. But that solar wind is constantly firing at the moon. But yes, in terms of all the debris that we're putting up into space, that is becoming increasingly an issue. We've talked about the fact that there isn't a lot of direct warfare that happens in space, but actually there's this thing called the Kessler syndrome. The idea is that basically as soon as you get beyond a certain number of objects in space, the ability to control them all so they don't crash into each other, we lose. Yeah. And then everything starts to crash, and it's the Sandra Bullock movie basically, and that has happened. So 2 years ago, President Putin deliberately destroyed one of his own satellites in order to create debris, just to say, you know, I can do this, and I can really cause a lot of debris in space.
Bleddyn, you look like you've just invested in a waste disposal unit for space.
Well, one country's waste disposal unit is an anti-satellite weapon. Right. So the responsibility is really important in current space negotiations and dialogue. So, and it's one of the key concepts that the UK Foreign Office has been really pushing at the United Nations in terms of trying to identify common threats and responsible behaviour in outer space. Sadly, the Russians spoiled any hope of getting a resolution at the UN General Assembly on this, but it got a lot of new countries who weren't really doing any like space diplomacy in the UN up until that point to really start engaging with space activities, because right now there are over 80 or 90 states with satellites in orbit or with companies registered in their jurisdictions that have satellites in space. So loads of companies have direct interest, but all countries that have signed up to the Outer Space Treaty, which is the vast majority, have to abide, in theory, to Article 9, which is about not modifying the environment of outer space. In practice, we seem to have accepted that putting lethal shrapnel and debris in orbit is fine, because we can't apparently avoid doing that. But on places like the moon, or especially Mars, where contaminating other celestial bodies becomes a real problem, that's where many countries have been more serious about not interfering with the environment, but we have had problems. So just a couple of years ago, I think an Israeli private mission launched on an American rocket, actually had tardigrades on the payload, so water bears, like microscopic creatures that can survive in the vacuum of space. That crashed into the moon, and I assume some of those little things survived, and those things are on the moon now. So if we find tardigrades on the moon, we'll never conclusively know now whether that's because we put them there or whether they were there naturally. And that's got huge ramifications for the pursuit of life and the understanding of life. So there are real problems in the environment there. And by law, by international law, which again only matters so far as powerful states enforce it, there is whoever launches the object into space is responsible and liable for any damage it causes. So the trouble then becomes, when you have a piece of junk, have you conclusively proven whose junk it is? So, and that's really a problem for cleanup companies. You can only go for the objects everyone agrees, oh yeah, that's so-and-so's piece of rubbish, and you need their permission to take it out of the sky.
Carla, I just wonder if collaboration could work in the cleanup operation.
Yeah, I think we need to get hold of Dyson or someone to help us clean space. I don't know if all of you know, but aside from the satellites, actual space debris, which are bits of crashed satellites, I think there's a spatula, an astronaut glove, various stuff floating around. There's over 6,000, it must be more now, 7,000 items of bigger than 10 centimeters, which are being tracked constantly. What we can't track is the smaller stuff. So even a fleck of paint, a little chip of paint, because it's traveling at 17,000 miles an hour, if it hits something, and one did actually make a hole in the
shuttle
shield,
windscreen.
the shuttle windscreen. And so how do you collect? There have been many, many ideas. We've tried, a lot of collaborations have tried to come up with how do you collect stuff that's traveling at 17,000 miles an hour and not all in the same direction. So it is very challenging to solve that problem, and it becomes a bigger problem. The space station is continually having to move to avoid debris. And if you're launching, how do you launch between 20,000 satellites and 6,000 pieces of debris? So it's a pertinent question for the whole industry. Never mind what we're dropping on the moon. And
you need those 3 IBM computers.
You do. Interestingly, just over there, I brought with me the catalogue of everything we've ever launched into space. It's just there.
It's a very big book.
And so at least as an industry, we have got a list. You're welcome to have a look at it later. The scary thing about it, though, is that the reason I produced that catalogue is I was asked to do a talk 6 years ago. And so I produced this catalogue, and I've recently updated it. It's now twice as thick. So in the first 60 years of space exploration, we launched about 6,000 objects in space. We've done the equivalent to that in the last 6 years.
I remember writing this. I started my PhD in 2012. I remember those early drafts of rubbish I was writing, and there were 1,200 active satellites back in 2012. Today, we are closer to 12,000 active satellites in space. So, yeah.
That's definitely food for thought. So I'd rather not end on that rather negative, because I think that is a big worry for us all. So I just wanted to end, we've got to wrap up in 5 minutes, but we've had a question which was submitted in advance, which I think could leave us perhaps on a little bit of a higher note. What major breakthrough are you forecasting for the next 10 years?
I'll go last.
So Bleddyn's not going to do anything because it's 30 years. No, so 10 years. Has anybody got anything for 10? Ian?
Yeah, I think, so we talked about AI, we talked about how much, we talked about cat and dog videos. AI, those of you in the know, it's an incredibly computationally expensive thing that happens. Every time you use your ChatGPT, every single word that comes out has to run through this massive computer with billions of parameters, and it's using, the amount of energy that we're consuming is going through the roof at the moment. One of the things that could happen is that we could take those supercomputers and stick them on satellites in space where they're solar powered, and we could move those data centers out into space and actually not cause the massive damage to the environment of all the energy that we're using. So that could very well happen.
Yeah, I think a new area of study now is biological computing. I don't even know what it's called, but a cell is much more efficient energy-wise than anything else we've ever developed. And so they're now working with DNA where they've been able to store data on DNA and retrieve that data. It's very, very basic. But I think in the next 10 years, if they're able to do this, you would literally have a supercomputer in a test tube, which would be major for the environment. If I could say something philosophical.
Yeah.
Since it's difficult when you're speaking to scientists and engineers, but I am here in a cathedral. I do believe that God made us in his image, and I think anyone who steps outside and looks, you can see that God is a creator. And we are creative. We are creators. It's what we do best. And I think things like AI have opened up the opportunity for us to save time, to use AI not to cheat on tests, not to make fake videos, all the nonsense that we always, we wielded atomic weapons like children with toys. We wield genetics now. We're doing the same with AI. And if we could just take ownership of the mandate we were given to responsibly look after our environment and to use technology to free us up that we could create, I think you'll see astounding changes in the next 10 years.
Yeah, so I mean, it may surprise you that I'm quite a skeptic of many technologies. So yeah, this is a very difficult question, but the places I find most interesting in terms of things that are coming sort of down the road is always material science. So in terms of chip technologies, moving away from silicon chips to other kinds of chips that allow far greater density of transistors in the same amount of surface area, much more so than silicon, or much more efficient batteries beyond what lithium can do, better energy efficiency, hopefully using less waste or creating less waste in those processes as well. Those incremental things that are going to be deployed en masse is what gets me interesting. So I'm less interested in sort of innovations or brand new things. It's what can be affordably deployed at a very huge scale by most people to make a bit bigger difference. Genetics as well is a fascinating one, also quite terrifying as a non-geneticist. But again, huge potential, well, we're already seeing advances in all sorts of medical science there. But in terms of where the biggest investments in technology are needed, it's to deal with ecological collapse and climate disaster. But that's not on a good note, I'm sorry.
Blown it. Well, I'll shortly hand over to Tim to wrap up this evening, but I think it's been a very informative evening from my point. I hope you all agree that our panel have dealt with many issues that we have got us thinking more than I really oughtn't to use ChatGPT that much, and I really must stop watching cat videos. But you've given us a lot of food for thought. So I'd like to thank Bleddyn, Ian and Carla for a very entertaining panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, thank you very much for holding the space for us so expertly. Bleddyn, Ian, Carla, thank you for sharing your expertise. It's been mind-blowing for me in many ways, in some very significant ways, but also as a dyed-in-the-wool Pink Floyd fan, to hear that the dark side of the moon is not always dark has been a major disappointment. But more seriously, thank you very much. And Carla, thank you for bringing us back a couple of times to the realization that the people of God are engaged in the wonders of this universe and all that animates us. And that's the kind of debate and discussion that we're trying to promote here regularly. Thank you all for attending very much. I'm sorry if all of your questions weren't answered. That was an inevitability. But hopefully this has been a really stimulating food for thought. And thank you again.